Hello and welcome back to Wildcard Workshop. Today we're going to continue working on our virtual sentry system, getting the base framework set up, and we're going to go a little bit over the general design of what this mod is going to be real quick. I know we talked about it a bit in the design document episode last time, but this time we're going to be looking at sort of how things are going to be set up. So we're going to have, for instance, our virtualization station. What this is going to be is it's going to be like a big platform that you can waltz your creatures up on and then virtualize them and turn them into these crystals that can be installed in the sentry towers. Now, on these platforms, you're also going to have the option to install some pedestals. Now, these pedestals are going to be a bit like the artifact pedestal, in that you can put artifacts in them and it'll show it on the pedestals. We'll have the artifacts hovering. And then what happens is the platform is actually going to communicate with the pedestals. These are all going to be separate structures that are snapped together, but I'm going to show you how to get that communication going between them. And the way that these artifacts are going to come into play is that when a creature is virtualized, we're going to see if we can take those artifacts, use them in some fancy magical calculations, and determine whether or not anything special will happen to the virtualization crystal, the sentry crystal. Additionally, you're going to have the option of opening the artifacts, either individually or as like a fusion kind of thing, to get a chance of augment crystals, which can also be used in the sentry towers to give them general bonuses to the entire tower. Now, that's the virtualization station. So that's kind of how we get our data crystals for the system. Now we've also got the sentry tower. Now the way this is going to work is it's also going to be a modular design. It's going to be a multi-piece structure. Okay, we'll have the tower base, which is actually going to be the core of the system. You'll only have one per tower. And then from the tower base, you'll be able to install segments. Now, right now, I'm only planning on two segments, a defense segment and an augment segment. The way these will work is you'll stack them on top of each other in whatever configuration you want. We might do something where the particular configuration might have some effects. We'll see about that as we go. But what will happen is, again, the base, the foundation of the tower, will basically be the core of the system. It'll have most of the functional logic. And what it'll do is it'll communicate with all of its segments by the link structures. What it'll then do is pull data from the crystals. Now, the way these crystals are going to be applied is they're not actually going to sit in an inventory on the towers. The crystals are actually going to be structures. They're going to be snapped to the tower as well. And then the tower will be able to communicate with the structure as it is to pull data from it. And then from there, the tower base will have a collection of information on how it operates. So it's more like the tower foundation is actually the primary structure, and everything we add onto it is just a provider of data, information, and modification on how it works. So what we want it to do is whenever players get within a certain range of this tower, or enemies or threatening creatures, something like that, whenever there's a threat nearby, we want the tower to activate. We want it to pull all of the data from the sentry crystals to get all of the creatures that it's going to summon. We want it to pull all of the data from the augment crystals to get whatever modifier. Well, actually, it's going to pull the data from the augment crystals first, because some of those modifiers might be things to like the range of the tower's effect, for instance. So it's kind of, whenever the tower's built, it's going to keep a running tally of whatever augments are in place. When it comes to when a threat is in range, then it'll pull all of the creature data, or it'll have all of that already stored. We'll figure out what the best way to handle that is when we get to that point. But then once it has a threat, once it has a target or targets, it'll spawn the creatures. Now I still got to do some experimentation on the way that it's going to do this. I would like to avoid creating variants for every creature. Because, one, it's time consuming, and two, it's not actually very forward compatible. So I'm going to see if there isn't a way that we can spawn the creatures using their normal classes and then modify them such that their materials, any stat attribution bonuses and such, any buffs might be applied to them without us having to create a whole new separate instance for every creature, or a whole new separate class for every creature. Because that's just not very efficient. Now, we might have to do that, but we'll see when we get to that point. For right now, for today, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to set up the base blueprints for the general file structure. So we're going to set up the parent-child relationships between all of the different crystal types, because it's basically going to be, we'll have the virtualization crystal parent, and then we'll have the sentry crystal parent and the augment crystal parent. And again, if we can, I would like to make it so that we don't have to create a bunch of subclasses for those, but rather that their data and their manipulations are just stored as dynamic as possible. But again, we will see how that works. Going to be some experimentation in the process of this project, because I did not build it in advance as one might expect. Now, there's a reason that I didn't do this. One thing that always drove me nuts when I was taking tutorials when I was younger was I'd see these projects that someone has spent all this time building beforehand, and they're just kind of taking it apart in chunks and then looking at it. And the reason for that is because it made it very hard to learn how to debug issues. They've already dealt with the issues. They're already gone. So we're going to run into issues. We're going to run into challenges as we're going through this project. But when I do run into those issues, I'm going to have it in fresh mind, and I'm going to be able to show you what I did to debug it and how I fixed it, how I came to the conclusion I did. Okay? Because that is one of the most useful things that you will gain as you are learning, is how to overcome the problems. Not just what you're doing right, but how to address when something has gone wrong. So we're going to try and cover that as well throughout the course of this project, because it isn't something that we've covered much up to this point. Debugging, problem solving, those are incredibly important to learn. So I'm going to do my best to try and impart some of those skills to you as well. But it is a matter of experience. As you run into issues, you're going to become better at solving issues of that type. So I'm going to impart as much as I can over the course of this project, but it's going to depend on what issues we run into. So it's a little bit of a... I'm going to roll the dice a little bit on that one. Now, let's go ahead and hop over to the dev kit. We'll go over the files that I've created. So here we are, finally back in the dev kit. I know, it's been a while. But let's go ahead and go over how I've started to set up this mod. So first thing is first, we need our required files. And if you are not familiar with these, we covered these in some of the earliest videos. But all you need for any mod, for any standard mod, not talking about maps or total conversions here, is an empty map file, an empty level file right here, that in its primal game data override value, you have given it a personal primal game data file, which I have open here, and there's only a few things currently changed in it. First, the mod name, Virtual Sentry System. That's our mod, that's what we're doing. Give it a brief little description. It's kind of cheesy. Immortalize your battle-ready companions as digital sentries, protecting your assets from invaders. Pretty simple. That's what it do. Now, aside from that, the only other change so far is that I've added some engrams. We will cover these in a moment, though. But, again, this is all you need. You do not need a game mode if you are not specifically overriding anything within a game mode. So leave that default if you're not messing with it. Don't make your own game mode. Now, first things first. We basically have two structures and some item types that are going to be structures in this mod. First of which, Virtual Station. Now, something fancy that if you're not familiar with it, you can come up here to Window and then Class Viewer. It will take a while, but as soon as it's done, we'll have a nice handy view that we can use, and I'll explain how it works in just a moment. So with this open, come up here to Filters, uncheck Actors Only. You'll notice it also unchecks Placeable Only here. What this does is this gives you a full and complete class hierarchy and the entire inheritance process for every class in the dev kit. What I mean is, we've got all of these base classes. We can see what directly inherits from them. We can see what directly inherits from another one. So, for instance, if I come up here too, and I type in primal item, you can see one big hierarchy here and how everything is inheriting from something else. You can use this view, this class viewer, for determining where in a hierarchy tree you want to place something. It gives you a nice, good overview. Make use of it. For instance, you can see from primal item generic, we are inheriting, from primal item base, for example, we are inheriting from primal item base to primal item virtual crystal base underscore VSS. That is one of our new ones. Now you'll notice that in my mods, I tag all of my files with a suffix. In this case, they are all tagged with underscore VSS at the end, save for the level file because it's just sort of a named file in this case. Now that's the class viewer. This is handy because, like, if I expand virtual crystal base, you will see we've also got two classes here, Augment Crystal Generic and Sentry Crystal Generic. Now from these we might have other subclasses that inherit from each of these individually. The benefit of this is knowing that if there is any functionality in a given class that you want to inherit from and that you want your classes to inherit, you can search them out here and see where it sits in a hierarchy of inheritance. So I can put some base functionality in Virtual Crystal Base that will be inherited by Augment Crystal Generic and Sentry Crystal Generic. These might have different logic in each of them, but then I can have some subclasses to each of these that inherit from both Virtual Crystal Base and Augment Crystal Generic or Sentry Crystal Generic. It just depends on how I want to lay out this logic. Now, back to the task at hand. Virtual Station. 2 pieces to this. Well, technically 9 pieces, but 8 of those pieces are the same piece. First off is the platform. In here I've created 4 files. We have our engram entry. Let me just open all of them real quick. We have our engram entry, which is linked here in blueprint entry to the primal item structure class. Now this is the item that sits in your inventory. This is what you use to place the structure. So we have its blueprint entry here for this. Right now I just have all of the engrams in this mod set to level 1 engram point, just for testing and debugging and making it easier as we're developing it. Once we get to the end of the mod, well, not necessarily the end, but closer to a feature complete mod, then we'll start looking at how do we want these items crafted, what level do we want them to be accessible at, what do we want their crafting requirements to be. Generally, it's best to decide those things after you have worked out a mod and gotten all of its functionality, and you see how strong it is, how weak it is. You know where to put it on a balance scale to determine its costs. So we'll determine that closer to the end. Now, on our primal item structure, the only thing, something I may not have shown before. If you are in a class blueprint here, and you want to see what has been changed in it, all you need to do is come up here to this little eye symbol, click Show Only Modified Properties, and then it will reduce the entire list to show only what has been modified in this class instance, well, in this class declaration. Okay, so for instance, so far, the only things I've changed from its inherited values of primal item structure generic, that's its parent class. The only things I've changed are the descriptive name base, which is generally what you name it, what it's going to show up as in the inventory. In this case, virtualization station platform. And the item description, convert your creatures into energy. The sentry tower will call upon them in times of need to defend your home. And then I tell it what structure to build. Now, this is how you link to an actual structure BP. So we also have that right here. Now, we don't have a mesh in it yet. I haven't made them, but we have it. So I've made sort of the stub initial class for this. Okay, we'll start linking things up in as we go, and they're created. You can link that here in structure to build. That way, when you consume the primal item to place the structure, this is what it knows to place. Now, in the structure blueprint itself, there is another field, and it is down here in the structure section, consumes primal item. This is how we tell it what item is consumed in building it. Now, that's an interesting point to note, because technically you could have an item that builds structure pieces, but instead of consuming the item used to construct it, it can consume other items like materials directly out of your inventory. Now, in this case, it's only set to the system is only set up to consume one item, but you could create your own secondary system for that too, if you wanted to. But just know it's a loop here in that you link these to each other. You're telling what structure to build, and telling the structure this is what you consume once you're built from the inventory of the person building. Now, this structure also has an inventory. Its parent's class is structure item container base BP. So we made a primal inventory BP. Now, nothing in this is changed. Right now, this is empty. I haven't made any changes to this. It just inherits from primal inventory component. But after I created it, make sure that after you create a primal inventory BP, that if you have your target structure, the structure that you want to have that inventory open already, close it and then reopen it. Pop over to the components tab. And then in the add component, start typing part of the name. Like in this case, we would type virtual and they would show up. And then just go ahead and add it in here. This will create the inventory component that makes up the structure. Again, we will fill this in later. But for now, that's how it's set up. These are just sort of the base classes needed to get something functional. Now, we don't have any assets, nothing visual to represent any of this. But the framework is in place. It is the same thing for the pedestal. The engram links to the primal item structure class. The primal item structure class links to the primal structure. Primal structure links back to the primal item structure for what to consume. And the primal inventory is added into the components tab of the structure. So those are pretty much the same. These will vary greatly in how they function between these two, which is why they do not have a custom parent between them. They are just both children of primal inventory or structure item container base BP, The sentry tower, on the other hand, is a different story. All of the sentry tower pieces are getting a singular common parent, sentry tower base. Now, this one is going to be sort of the functional container for all of these shared functions between all of the foundation and segments. Now, in these ones, none of these items, none of these structures have an inventory. So it's a little bit different. their parent is just, their parent is just structure-based BP, okay? So the Sentry Tower base is a child of structure-based BP. The foundation is a child of Sentry Tower base. The segments are both, there's a Sentry Tower segment generic, which is a child of Sentry Tower base. And then each of the segments are a child of the Sentry Tower segment generic. So now we've got kind of an inheritance tree forming. And if I open up that class viewer again, and we look at it, what you'll see is Sentry Tower base, Sentry Tower foundation, Sentry Tower segment generic are sibling classes, meaning they both inherit from Tower base, but they are not directly in each other's inheritance tree. And then we've got the two segment types, augment and defense, that are a child of segment generic. So you can see how that tree is starting to form there. So if we put any functions in Sentry Tower base, all of these will inherit those functions. If I put them in Sentry Tower foundation, none of these ones are going to get it. If I put it in Sentry Tower segment generic, the foundation will not get those functions, but the two segment types will. So that's sort of the layout. And then for the crystals, we kind of went over a little bit before. I gave them one common parent, and then they're both in here. And these might also get their own child classes as well, depending on how much we have to break this up. But I'm hoping that we won't need to at all. Now, after I've created all of those, the only ones with engrams are the Sentry Tower foundation, the two segments, and the pedestal and the platform. So 5 engrams altogether so far. The crystals will not, because these are not going to be crafted in the normal sense. These are going to be sort of a special quote-unquote ritual to sort of create these. It's not going to be from a crafting menu. I didn't make engrams for these common parent classes because they're not actually intended to be crafted in the game. These are ones that we use. These are classes specifically that we use for inheriting functionality and class members. We don't actually spawn them into the game. And that'll make more sense as we go along if you're not familiar with that process. But because we're doing it this way, we won't really need to use interface blueprints. As I mentioned before when we were covering interface blueprints, it's mostly for when you are working with classes that are in disparate inheritance trees. They don't actually have a common parent that you have access to. For instance, their only common parent is a C++ class. Then you won't be able to edit it. So we can use an interface blueprint to add functionality, similar functionality to two disparate classes. In this case, we won't need to do that because we have a common parent that we can use in this case to add whatever functionality or variables to it that we need. So we will make use of that because it is within our power to do so. It is a better way of doing it. Now the last thing that I did is after I created all of the engram entries, I went back up here to our Primal Game Data BP. I found the additional engram blueprint classes array, and then I added all 5 engrams to this entry. So Sentry Tower Foundation, Sentry Tower Segment Augment, Sentry Tower Segment Defense, Virtual Station Pedestal, and Virtual Station Platform. After that, I saved, and then I made a commit to my repository. Now, I will also post the link to that commit in the description below if you would like to download it. But that's what we've got so far. We've got kind of a foundation framework that we've got set up for how these core systems sort of relate to each other and where we can start putting logic in to get them hooked up and doing fun things. So now that we've got our initial file relations set up, in the next episode, I'm going to hopefully have some hull models ready. I'm not going to show you the creation of any of the models that I make for this, because that is a whole different topic. I'm not a good 3D artist by any means. It takes me a while to make these. If I were to try and record them, these videos would be days long. So, I will be making some temporary models, some just quick, get the general shape kind of thing going so that we can get some initial snap points and physical structure to work with in game. And then down the road, as I've had more time to work on these, I will introduce, the final models, better materials, things like that. When I do make material graphs, I will cover that in the videos. Just not anything that as far as like Photoshop or Blender. I will probably show you the export settings from Blender just so that you know them. But anything beyond that, anything beyond the transition from external software to the dev kit, I'm not really going to cover. Most of those other pieces of software have plenty of tutorials and educational resources that you can leverage in order to learn how to use them properly. So I don't think that it would be of much benefit for me, being that I am not the greatest with the artistic skill sets. But yes, in the next episode, we will cover a bit more of the setup of these initial files that we've created and start building out maybe some of the logic for the interconnected operations of them. And I'll kind of show you how all of that starts to fit together. We're actually going to, hopefully within not too many episodes, have sort of a prototype functionality for the mod. It won't be polished, but we'll have a point that we can start to get the better looking pieces of it going. So until next time, happy modding.